Hey guys, Matt Gurney here. Jen Gerson's here. It is the latest episode of the Line podcast, recorded October the 18th, 2024. Oh my God, a lot happened this week. We're going to start talking federal politics, and we're going to keep talking federal politics for a while. Foreign interference and Liberal Party intrigue, oh my. We're also going to talk about a report that Jen saw this week about medical aid in dying, and she flagged it for my attention. I have a pretty stark view on this one, and I think Jen's going to try and talk some sanity back into me. We're also going to talk the latest numbers on Canadian attitudes towards immigration. I think we broke it. All that and more in the next episode of the Line podcast.
This episode of The Line has been brought to you by Unsmoke Canada. Canada can be a global leader in reducing the harm caused by smoking, but it requires actionable steps, including giving adult smokers the information they need to choose potentially less harmful alternatives. Learn more at unsmoke.ca.
Jen, I don't normally share all your personal stuff on the podcast, but I'm just going to mention you had a bug this week. You were feeling under the weather, and you kind of had to lay low and rest up for a couple of days.
I did. I even had to cancel a panel, which I almost never have to do. So I was very sad. I was invited to do a panel, and I had to be like, "I'm sick. I can't get on a stage. Like, it's going to be bad if that happens. Bad things will happen."
There was the story early in the pandemic of like this group of like adventurers who went on like a long multi-week wilderness hike.
Yeah.
And then when they came back, like the world had shut down. Mm-hmm. I was kind of worried about you this week, thinking that by the time like you were feeling better and you were checking emails again, everything you had been talking about would be obsolete, right? Because this was a busy week. Where do you even, like, so I'm going to have to kind of play podcast host here, but also probably get you caught up a little bit on some of what's been going on.
Yes.
What do you want to talk about? Like, literally, where do you want me to go first?
Well, I mean, we have the column that you wrote for us this week about the foreign interference inquiry. We may want to get into it a little bit. There was some interesting editing friction between the two of us on that column because I sort of forced you to cut an entire third of it out, like save it for the dispatch, which I think will be repurposed for the dispatch. But I think there's more to talk about on the foreign interference stuff. But you have been following it much more closely than I have been able to follow anything that wasn't between my couch and my bathroom over the last few days. And then, of course, just like the latest weird liberal caucus coup, I'm starting to really resent reading about unnamed liberal sources threatening to force Trudeau to resign any minute now. But, you know, I don't think there's any there at this point, guys. But hey, let's get into the latest version of this story. And then on top of that, we had news from, I think it was the Globe that broke this, but it could have been someone else, that we have got 4 Liberal cabinet ministers announcing that they're not going to seek re-election. Those of you who've been following the Line podcast closely will know that Matt made this very explicit prediction like 2 weeks ago that as the Liberal will to live drains out of the collective ether, we're going to just see a lot of people say fuck it o'clock, either by not showing up to vote for confidence motions and leading to potentially chaotic scenarios, or we're just going to watch people be like, it's time to spend more time with my loved ones and family at home. Sending out resumes, just quiet quitting, essentially. And this week we got some evidence of some liberal quiet quitting going on. So I think we should talk about all that. I think we should also bring up the fact that I have predicted that there's a non-zero chance that we're heading into an accidental election between now and spring. I think now would be a good time. Yeah, chaos election. I think now would be a good time to bring up that possibility yet again for people. We should talk about the possibility of proroguement because, of course, that one's been making the rounds again. So where do you want to start here?
Let me start by actually trying to stitch a through line between all of those
all right.
things.
Let's do that. You were in a much more fit state to stitch together a through line than I possibly am.
I'm seeing it all. It's God's tapestry, the wonder of creation. Everything's connected. something I've been observing for a few months, and I don't know if I've commented on it here or not, because to be honest, I don't think it's a big deal. To me, this is just something I kind of observed as a guy who watches politics. There have been fits of liberal combativeness. And I'm not saying that as a criticism, but it'll be like a Tuesday. I'm sitting in my living room or my family room, like eating a sandwich, and I have like the news channels on, and then I'll see a couple of clips of some liberal that day went out and like talked tough about Pierre Poilievre wants to destroy healthcare. And then I'll like peek at Twitter and I'll see the ministers are all doing like a coordinated like tweet campaign that day. Sure. And then the prime minister gets up in the house and is fiery and I'm like, oh, okay. And like, I know what that is. This is like the word having gone out, like it's fight back day. Or fight back week. Like we're going to go out, we're going to attack tough this week. And I think some of that's just basic politics, which is why I don't know if I've specifically commented on this before. But we talked in the podcast last week about what I think has gone wrong for the Liberals. And it's how I think, you and I have talked about this. You phrased it really well, where you said their theory of the case is wrong. And the way I had described it was that they've made a category error. They're asking themselves a question, and the question they're asking is, what that is not our fault explains our problems. And that's why they're stuck and they can't get out of the trap, because they've asked the question so badly that they can't answer it, or they can't answer it correctly. And one of the things I think that they're doing when they have this thought process of what that is not our fault has happened to us is that they conclude we haven't been strong enough. We haven't been aggressive enough. We haven't pushed back enough. So you have these moments of, oh, okay, they're all tweeting today. It's abortion day, or it's gun control day, or it's healthcare day, and they're all going to tweet up about this. And then they're going to wait a few days and the polls won't improve, and then they're going to try something else. And I think all of these stories tie back to that, because I think what the Prime Minister did this week at the Foreign Interference Commission can be viewed through the lens of a frustrated guy deciding to go for a big showy moment. I think the caucus getting frustrated and calling this mutiny vote next week can be explained by them sending the signal, our days of anger ain't working. And I think the cabinet ministers, 4 of them at once, announcing this week, and you're right, I think the Globe had it first, but everybody kind of had it simultaneously, but I did see the Globe had it first. I think that's cabinet ministers going, I'm tired of doing days of rage. Like, I'm tired of getting, you remember a couple of weeks ago, I think it was Althea Raj who had it. I'm trying to remember it, but I remember mocking it at the time, not the article, but the thought process, which was like the Liberals have concluded at their meeting after the LaSalle by-election that we need to see more Justin Trudeau and we need more coordinated social media messaging of government accomplishments and objectives here. To me, I'll quote you, the theory of that case is fucking wrong. But I think what we're seeing this week is consistent with a party that has concluded, if only they tweeted harder, if only they were chippier in the house, if only they gave better sound bites. So I think we can go and take a look at all these individual things, but that's the through line I draw through all of them. They don't know why they're losing. They're coming to the wrong conclusions about what'll fix it. And the caucus is increasingly frustrated, and the ministers, at least 4 of them, have said, fuck it, I'm out.
So let's go, on that note, let's talk about the foreign interference stuff. You were glued to your screen watching especially the Prime Minister's testimony at the Foreign Interference Commissioner inquiry now. Which are we at? You could tell I'm not 100%. Foreign Interference, we're the Hague Commission, right?
Hague Commission, yeah. The
Commission. So
foreign, I don't remember the formal title, but yeah.
Okay, so we're going to call it the Foreign Interference Commission. Thank you.
Whatever. Or inquiry.
And you were glued to your seat watching the Prime Minister testify on this point. Can you just give us an overview? What was the news? What was the big top line item that he hit with?
Okay, that's a great question. Well, the news of the week was his blistering attack on Pierre Poilievre. But I'm going to preempt myself for 1 minute here. He also revealed something that almost nobody paid attention to, that I actually am going to write about in the Dispatch. Figuring out anything about how government works in this country is almost impossible for all the reasons that you and I have talked about before. But the prime minister did actually kind of reveal, as terms of an internal process changed, that how he receives intelligence has completely changed in recent years. And it actually sounds now like a coherent thing.
This is good.
That was interesting.
Can we put a pin in that and just get back to the news? Like, what's the
done.
news?
Like that. Okay. That was the only point I wanted to make. Cool. They actually have made a change. So I'm leading with a compliment. Good work, guys.
Okay.
But the big thing that sucked up all the attention this week was the prime minister saying on the stand that he has seen a list of conservatives who are either implicated in or vulnerable to foreign interference. And I want to come back in a minute to the or vulnerable to, because that's very careful language. And I think I know what the prime minister is doing there. Mm-hmm. But the net effect of this, more than one conservative friend of mine said to me this week, is this Joe McCarthy? Like, I have a list of conservatives. Now, I don't think it was quite McCarthy. I don't think it was. But I also think the PM has opened a can of worms here. And that's what I wrote in my column. If you want to dangle the existence of a list in front of the Canadian people, you then can't turn around and say, and by the way, I'm not telling you who's on the list.
Yeah.
That is wildly irresponsible.
Okay, so here's a couple of takeaways that I'm taking from this particular thing. And I think that your column was broadly right in that what this was a prime minister who thinks that he's playing 4D chess by getting the daily dunk on the prime minister, on Pierre Poilievre. But as we've seen again and again and again, Trudeau has a tendency to make tactically smart decisions, but strategically dumb ones. So he'll do something that will win the news cycle in the day, but then he has to come back 2 days later and deal with the problem that win has given him. And the problem that so he wins this news cycle for the day by saying, I have a list of conservatives who are vulnerable to foreign interference, but I can't give you the list because, of course, that's a national security concern. This is complete bullshit. If it's irresponsible to release the names publicly due to national security concerns, it's equally irresponsible to claim that you have a list of names but can't tell us who they are. So and publicly tease the names for political gain and political advantage. You can't have your cake and eat it too here. If the concerns are significant enough and serious enough, you have two options. You can either release the names and release the list and let the public sort it out and let the public decide how credible your evidence is, or you can go privately to the members of the Conservative Party who are appropriately cleared, let them know your concerns, and leave it within the leader's prerogative to deal with those concerns. So one of the ways that he could have handled this, for example, was that he could have gone to one of the Conservatives' top secret cleared senior level staffers. I believe the name was Ian Todd as being the appropriate proxy staffer for that, said, look, here are the names, here are the concerns, here's where they're coming from. And then Ian Todd could have, he can't necessarily go and take that classified information and then go tell Pierre directly. But he could, for example, be like, Pierre, perhaps you should not be reapproving this name in a nomination battle. And we all know that, for example, leaders have wide political discretion to decide who they're going to put forward for nomination or not. So there are things that I do think that the Conservatives could have practically done with that information. However, the Liberals said, I have this crucial information, but it wasn't crucial enough for us to either see fit to give it to you or see fit to act on it in any meaningful way. Thirdly, is that I would say is the Prime Minister can't come out and say, I have a list of all the Conservatives who are vulnerable to foreign interference. I'm hyper vigilant about what's going on the Conservative side, and then claim total ignorance about what's going on in his own party. If you're saying that you have this information and you're on the ball about what's going on in the Conservative Party, then you must also know what's going on in your own tent, right? And you've done something about it. And instead, what we've seen for the last year and a half from this Prime Minister, delay, deflect, and deny that anybody in his parties has any particular vulnerabilities to foreign interference, even after the evidence has overwhelmingly come forward to suggest that that's simply not true. Now, I think that neither of us carry water for either party, and I think that we should say that when it comes to foreign interference, we're pretty equal opportunity shit disturbers. We're totally open to the possibility and likelihood that foreign interference is coming from more than one country and it's targeting more than one party. It's coming from a whole bunch of different countries, and it's targeting all the parties. We should also talk about what's happened in India in this context, or with the diplomatic relations collapsing with India here. Is it generally believed that China perhaps has more of influence in the Liberal Party, and perhaps India has a little bit more influence in the Conservative Party? I think that's a generally believed position.
Even by people in the know. Yeah.
Even by people in the know. But that being said, I don't think that that's universal or strict. I certainly think that there's been attempts at influence in the Conservative Party by the Chinese, and I suspect that the influence that may be going on the Indian side is pretty widespread. So, like, nobody's innocent here, but the only way that we actually now at this point get to the bottom of any of this is with a full disclosure and full transparency on what's on these lists, and allow the public to decide it. And which won't happen. So I think that once again, what we have here is we have a prime minister making pretty scandalous accusations without choosing to show the receipts for those accusations, and then hiding behind a cover of national security in order to obfuscate and hide from accountability and transparency. And like Canada, as we ranted about last week, already has a culture of extreme lack of transparency and lack of openness, broadly speaking. And when you add the word national security to the list, all of a sudden everybody backs off. Oh, well, if it's a national security concern, like that is just taken as read. And
national security or before the courts are magic
talismans to make any kind of scrutiny go away, which is absolutely
both.
Well, which is, and also bluntly, that's completely nonsense. That's complete nonsense. You can't expect us at this point, after this many years of this level of fuckery, to continue to take claims of national security concerns as anything other than a totally weaponized attempt to deny accountability and transparency. That's all that is at this point. I don't take national security claims or claims that we have to remain private as a result of that. I don't take those terribly seriously anymore. It's not because I don't think that there are national security concerns that do need to remain private. I understand that there are real reputational and source issues that need to be addressed when you're dealing with some of these sensitive issues. But at this point, too many politicians have simply managed to elide real accountability for too long, making these claims, for me to take any of them seriously at this point. I've completely lost trust in any politician that's claiming, I can't tell you because of national security concerns. Fuck you.
I agree.
Completely fuck you. I mean, you've lost any faith that I would have as a journalist to take you seriously at that claim at face value anymore.
What I found so frustrating about this week, and you as my able and graceful editor encountered this headlong, was that the news this week was massive. And I don't mean dramatic. I just mean complicated. There is a ton of material to kind of wade through here, and bringing any kind of focus to it is really hard. I want to mention, for purely contextual purposes, something that we alluded to a few minutes ago, but I don't think we really fully engaged with it, and it's important. The Prime Minister's comments, and I think they were irresponsible, but he made them in the specific context of Pierre Poilievre not having that security clearance. It was a gotcha. It was, I know something, I've seen a list that this guy won't see, and not that he's choosing not to see. And I agree with the Prime Minister that Pierre Poilievre should see the list. But I think that what the Prime Minister did is also bad. And we live in a political moment right now where all anyone wants to hear is that Trudeau good, Poilievre bad, or the opposite. And I think I'm looking at two guys right now behaving in a way that doesn't leave me with faith in either of them.
So I think we need to break that down a little bit more. We need to explain it a little bit more. So Pierre Poilievre has quite famously refused to get the security clearance that he would need in order to receive this briefing, this kind of a top-level fully classified briefing directly. So his argument for this is the problem is that the second he gets sworn in as someone who has this level of security clearance, he's also he gets all the information, but he also is paradoxically bound to secrecy. So his position essentially is that you are trying to swear me into this level of security clearance as a way of binding what I can say about what's going on privately, and also to weaponize the amount of information that you spoon feed me. I think that's fair. Now, different people can disagree about whether or not he should take on the security clearance or not. I think reasonable people can have different positions on this. But I can't see how the Liberals have behaved over the last 2 years and say that he's wrong. Like, they would absolutely weaponize the security clearance in order to silence Pierre Poilievre and be able to charge him with violating the National Securities Act. I absolutely believe this. I also think that as long as the Conservatives are putting forward someone with the top level security clearance, someone who is available to receive the necessary information, then that's fine. What we have seen is that when that someone has been provided, in this case, Ian Todd, their chief of staff, the information wasn't provided by the government anyway. The discretion that was given to the prime minister to provide information to that top level security clearance person was not exercised. So in which case I'm going like, well, even if Pierre Poilievre had received the top level security clearance, there's no guarantee you would have given him the information either, because you would have seen it as a too much partisan advantage to hold it over him and not provide that information till the election came out. So like, I don't believe that he's necessarily wrong here, that this would be weaponized against him. And I think that by trying to do this kind of weird gotcha in the testimony by being like, I've got a list of names, but that Pierre Poilievre hasn't received a security clearance, wink, wink, nudge, nudge, so he couldn't get it. I think this was a stupid, overly technical attempt at a gotcha. And secondly, I think that it's just ineffective. But also secondly, I think that what was I going to say there? Sorry, I just lost my train of thought.
You know what? It'll come back to you as soon as we're done recording.
It'll come back to you as soon as we're recording the podcast. Yeah. Anyway, like
Here, let me jump in with a response to some of that. There's a key issue here, and I'm going to keep my powder dry on it because I'm going to write something about it, and I need to research it more. Mm-hmm. But the fundamental issue here, and I'm going to allude to it.
No, sorry. Here, I got it back. I think that Justin Trudeau is alluding to a conspiracy theory. I think he's winking and nudging at a conspiracy theory by doing this.
Yeah.
A lot of the Truanons are out there saying that the reason why Pierre Poilievre has not received a security clearance is not because he can't. Because he's wrapped up in some nonsense, or his wife is wrapped up in some kind of crazy nonsense. It's a batshit crazy conspiracy theory. There's no evidence for it. I think that Pierre Poilievre's reasoning, rightly or wrongly, you and I can disagree with it or not agree with it, is what it is. I don't think that he would fail to pass a security clearance. But by having Trudeau come up there and try and turn this into a gotcha, he's feeding this conspiracy theory. So the very people, it's a dog whistle essentially. So the very few people who claim to be holier than the angels when it comes to disinformation and conspiracy theories are literally out there feeding it, as far as I can tell. So anyway, that was the point I needed to make.
On the about 9,000 people this week sent me an interview clip. Two former CSIS directors with David Cochrane on the CBC. It was actually funny this week too, because they're like, you need to talk to your colleague David Cochrane. At the time people were telling me this, I was literally talking to David Cochrane. So like it just made me laugh. But I am going to keep my powder dry on this, and to podcast listeners and viewers, I'm not trying to be a dick about this, but I'm just in a place where I think I have about 80% of the knowledge I need to make a statement, but I don't have 100% yet. And we're up against the weekend here, so I might not get it until next week. So be patient. But what we're running into here, I think, is a genuine disagreement over of an important but technical determination that is made in the national security briefing process. And I'm worried about it. And what I'm worried about here is that we're going to be in a position where rules, conventions, norms, regulations, etc., are not going to provide a definitive answer to an important question, and it's going to be weaponized by people on both sides of it. And I think I know which side I would take in that, but I'm actually more interested in the ambiguity. So I'm going to ask people to give me a couple of days to try and dot my I's and cross the T's on that one. But you're right about Pierre Poilievre would have his hands tied by this. Like, I don't dismiss his concerns. I don't think his concerns are wrong or invalid, but I think they're insufficient. And I agree with him. And it was interesting because Elizabeth May had noted in testimony, I think earlier today, maybe it was earlier this week. I'm sorry, it's all jumbled up in my head. She had noted that she got the clearance She took the briefing, she made public statements, and that her public statements were vetted by Canadian security officials, and she was told not to say certain things. And the Conservatives have taken that as, aha, we were right. Pierre would be muzzled. But what I think the Conservatives are not appreciating is two things. First of all, they're very good at comms. They're very good at it. And I think their explanation of why they won't get a briefing is shittier comms compared to what is he hiding? And I think they're going to lose that comms battle if the public pays attention, which is a big if. The other issue is, though, I don't know if the Conservatives have correctly valued how spectacular it would be if Pierre Poilievre got the clearance, took the briefing, called a press conference, and said, you would not believe what they are not telling you. And I am not allowed to tell it to you. But oh my God, we need an election tomorrow because this government is covering up appalling stuff that they have hidden from the Canadian people. And I am terrified by what I have seen. And when I am Prime Minister, I'm going to fix it.
So counter weaponizing the security clearance. I don't know if he can do that. I think you would need to double check. I don't know.
You can't give specifics.
I think legally he may be bound in terms of what his ability to say.
Yeah, no, he can't give any specifics. But there's nothing that would stop him from going, I'm terrified.
I'm not convinced that he could legally do that. But like, I don't know. Maybe. Okay, so here's one thing that I think was really interesting, because I don't remember this a couple of months ago, but Elizabeth May and Jagmeet Singh, who both got the security clearance, gave totally contradictory public statements about what was happening. I think it was at NCCOP, right? They were giving totally publicly contradictory statements about what was happening at NCCOP. And the end result is that neither one of them could prove which one was right, because neither one of them could come publicly and give the receipts. And to me, it just demonstrated, one, the degree to which this whole thing is a gong show, the degree to also which it's been weaponized, and also it's all a FUD tactic. It's all FUD tactic. Fear, uncertainty, and fear, uncertainty, deny. It's called FUD. Basically, the more fear, uncertainty, and denial you can throw out into the water, it's like chum in the water. You're messing up the stream of information, right? Giving them security clearance didn't make them more effective communicators or critics of the government. It just made them more confusing and more participatory in FUD techniques and denial techniques to obfuscate what was happening at the highest levels of government. So,
there's one difference, though. There's a really important difference here.
Mm-hmm.
Elizabeth May and Jagmeet Singh, under no circumstances, would have used that to call for an election. Singh doesn't want an election. May doesn't want an election. Poilievre could go out and give the verbatim statement Singh gave, with the exception of copy and pasting, and that's why we need an election today, at the end of every sentence.
Yeah, I'm just not sure that this gets him any further than where he is right now, politically or tactically.
I don't think it does either, but it gets the monkey of why won't he get cleared off his back.
Yeah, but I don't think it's necessarily a monkey. I think the only people who actually give a shit about that are truanons on Twitter. I just don't think that 99% of the average Canadian public is not aware that he does not have security clearance, or why, or gives a shit. It's a non-issue.
Right.
I think it's a non-issue.
I think you're right, but also you and I are in an occupational hazard here of 99% of the public doesn't care about 99% of what we talk about on this podcast.
That's true, and we never know the thing that's going to hit through. But I just don't think this one's going to hit through.
No, I agree with that 100%. But I'm still trying to judge this one on the merits, and I think the merits are this is what Poilievre should do. But the other thing I want to mention, and there's so much other federal stuff to talk about, but I want to drop a few quick bombs on you here. This is stuff that I did not talk about in my column because my column was too fucking long already. But there are some things that I honestly think are worth genuinely interesting that came out of this week. One of them was that the Prime Minister was asked, because he was a witness on the stand and he was cross-examined. And one of the things that came up is, okay, you've seen a Conservative list. Is there a Liberal list? And the Prime Minister acknowledged, yes, that there is. That there is also a list of Liberals who are have been complicit in or are vulnerable to foreign interference. And he was then asked, well, what have you done about it? And he gave a very careful answer where he said, well, as Prime Minister, there are things as party leader that I have the ability to do. And he pointed to Don Valley North, which is a polite reference to Han Dong, the former member of the Liberal caucus. Didn't refer to him by name, but referred to him by writing. And pointed to that as sort of
is this,
an
no,
example.
just to call, is this the one that we couldn't accuse of foreign interference because we're all racist against Asians?
By coincidence, yes.
Oh, wow. Okay, good to know.
The very same gentleman.
Wow.
Han Dong was a Liberal MP from Toronto riding who was accused of foreign interference. And the Prime Minister and a series of very senior Liberals made passionate defenses. And this was the original press conference that you're referring to where the Prime Minister talked about anti-Asian racism that I think in a weird way kicked this thing up a level in public consciousness. Because I think I felt this weird visceral fuck you response from the Canadian public when he said that.
I still feel that.
Even among normies, though, like even among people who were not that engaged had a bad reaction to that. So the Prime Minister kind of made a reference to the strong, the action that I took as Prime Minister to do this. And I'm thinking to myself, okay, here's a maximally charitable read of the Prime Minister here. He might have done actually much more dramatic and bold things that are not yet public knowledge, and he didn't want to openly refer to them. Okay, I grant that possibility, but I have to almost hope it's that. Because if the Prime Minister's best example of the action he's taken on Chinese electoral interference is what happened in Don Valley North, that's actually really fucking bad. Because Han Dong won 2 elections under the Liberal banner after the Prime Minister was warned about him. The Prime Minister and other senior Liberals repeatedly defended Han Dong, even after Mr. Dong stepped down from the Liberal caucus. And those defenses continued until other previous days at the Haute Commission brought forward information that had suddenly led, gee guys, I noticed, just so you know, the Liberals were all in on defending Han Dong. He will be vindicated. He will be back in our caucus one day. And then more information came out and it stopped. And you want to know one great example of that? The Prime Minister didn't say Han Dong. He said Don Valley North. So they went from passionate defense to the gentleman.
That sounds like an anti-Asian microaggression right there, as far as I can tell.
So I hope for our sake as citizens that there are better examples of what the Prime Minister has done, but I'm not convinced that there are.
Can I also
the other issue I want to underline?
Well, this is the other one.
Wording.
This is the one that I would say that connects to that, and that is when the Prime Minister, I believe, was asked why he permits sort of non-Canadian citizens to participate in nomination paddles. I think his answer was something, and I'm paraphrasing, something to the effect of, well, this is a great opportunity for new immigrants and students to participate in the political process. They can't vote in an election, but we can have them bust in for nomination battles. That's defensible. Okay.
I want one point on language, and then we can kind of move on from this. I'm offering this as an observation, not a comment, but I do want to underline that I noticed, because I read the statements. I've read the Prime Minister's testimony, and I read Pierre Poilievre's statement. Because after the PM made his attack, Pierre Poilievre responded the way you'd expect. Release the names.
Yeah, prove it.
I want to underline for the listeners and viewers 2 things that are really interesting, and I'll let them draw their own conclusions. In his testimony on the stand, the Prime Minister referred to this list of Conservatives who are, again, I don't remember the exact words. One of them was either complicit in or involved in, but the other one was vulnerable to. It is possible that the Prime Minister's list of Conservatives are honorable Canadian citizens who the Prime Minister has reason to believe have been targeted unsuccessfully by foreign intelligence agencies. And we're never going to know until the names come out and the circumstances do. And the Conservatives also playing the careful language game. And again, no criticism intended. I'm just underlining this for our honorable viewers and listeners. The Conservatives said, we want the names of anyone who has knowingly participated in foreign interference, which of course might leave some wiggle room if someone was sharing information or in partnerships with someone who might have had ties to a foreign intelligence service that the Conservative in question, again, hypothetically, might not have known about.
Well, so, I also would like more transparency about the people who have maybe been unsuccessfully targeted by foreign intelligence, because bluntly, how many stories have we heard now of MPs saying years after the fact, I knew something was going on, but I didn't know what it was. Like, we actually need the MPs themselves to be informed when they are the targets of something like this, right?
So that's why all those busty babes kept showing up in my hotel room every time
Exactly.
I went to a delegation somewhere abroad.
But often, sometimes the stuff is quite subtle, right? Sometimes they don't know, or it's a coffee, or it's a drink, or it's like, it can be quite. It doesn't have to be that egregious to be a problem.
I've had examples of that where
Yes,
some weirdo suddenly
busty
shows
women
up.
just show up at your door.
No, not
throwing
that,
themselves.
unfortunately. But like someone suddenly shows an intense interest in having lunch or coffee with me to talk about business matters. And then their LinkedIn tells me 2 years later that person is now like in a different country. And I've wondered at times, who are these people, right?
Mm-hmm.
The language stuff I just find really interesting. I think the names need to be released, but I also think we could release the names in a way that included an explicit, here are some of the names that are in the report, but these are people that we believe had done nothing wrong. This is someone we had intelligence had been targeted. This was someone who we believe was approached but turned them down. And I think something that people don't appreciate, Jen, and I've had versions of this conversation with individuals from 3 major federal parties. Parties themselves have a pretty good idea who their weaknesses are.
Of course they do.
If you're Pierre Poilievre, if you're Jagmeet Singh, if you're Justin Trudeau, even if you don't get a CSIS or an NCCOP briefing, you know the comedy clip of the guy in the hot dog costume?
Mm-hmm.
We're trying to figure out who did this. Like, sometimes I could see Pierre Poilievre, Justin Trudeau, Jagmeet Singh getting a briefing. A member of your caucus is involved in this. Mm-hmm. And they would look at it and they go, oh, fuck, that could be any of them. Other times, the list of suspects is awfully short. And I have a feeling, even though no party will talk about this officially, I have had some of this unofficially, that in recent years, particularly as this issue has been drawing attention, all of the political parties have made very subtle staffing decisions or nomination decisions. And some of the people they're worried about are now pursuing other opportunities. So I do think there is a little bit of an immune system response in these political parties. But in terms of public faith in the electoral system as a whole, we need to blow all of this out in the open, which has, I think, the advantage not only of vindicating or clearing every parliamentarian, including some who represent diaspora communities. Mm-hmm. There are Indian, Chinese, Middle Eastern, pick any flag in the world. They probably have representatives in the Canadian Parliament who are honorable, clean, hardworking,
absolutely,
entirely faithful to Canada. But if we don't identify who the problems are, they're going to come under suspicion. I also just think if the value of transparency is if we find out who these people are, we also then get to see whether their party leaders did anything about it before they were named. Mm-hmm. If you have some guy in a caucus who, with hindsight, is obviously a problem, did Mr. Singh, Trudeau, or Poilievre do anything about it before the person was named? I'd like to know that. I want to know which of these leaders proactively took actions to defend our democracy before it was all splashed over the globe. I suspect it's a short list.
I would also share that suspicion. On that note, do we want to talk briefly about the latest drama with Canada and India? I mean, I can I admit that, like, how should I say this? Can you just explain the news for me? Because I'm not entirely at my most sparkly self. Like, I'm really struggling here. Like,
what? No. Just on the Thanksgiving long weekend, which is interesting in itself.
Okay, thank you.
The Canadian government, Melanie Joly, Prime Minister Trudeau, and this is really interesting because we talked already about how transparency and disclosure sucks in this country. But senior RCMP officials proactively announced that results of an investigation that involved both intelligence and criminal investigation indicated that Indian diplomats in this country operating as intelligence agents were basically running a crime ring in Canada, where they were using organized crime with links to the Indian diaspora to target political rivals of the Indian government in Canada. And this included violent crime. Bribery, fraud, extortion. I don't remember the exact charges, but some of them were like financial crimes, fraud, and extortion. Some of them were violent crimes like arson, assault, and homicide. And after making this announcement, which was by Canadian standards wildly transparent, 6 Indian diplomats were ordered out of the country, persona non grata. And India is responding with accusations that we're a rogue state, that we are maligning their representatives.
And I think also in the U.S., an indictment now has been filed in the U.S. as well.
Give me 30 seconds on that.
I apologize.
There's been a really interesting split, because I think there's so much cynicism and bad blood in our politics right now that a lot of people assumed what Trudeau was doing was a stunt. I don't think that. I think he's got the goods. I think this is a genuine problem we have, and I think Canadian intelligence is on top of it. I also mainly don't think it's a stunt, because even if Justin Trudeau told the RCMP, I need like something dramatic to announce for a stunt, and even if the RCMP agreed, it would take them 10 months to come up with anything, because this is Canada. So I don't think this is a stunt. I think this is sincere. But a lot of Canadians are reflexively cynical and dismissive of anything Trudeau says, but then 2 days later, Justice Department in the United States announces identical charges against an Indian diplomat in the United States who was again using criminal world connections to target Indian government rivals, American citizens on American soil.
Okay, so
India, stop.
Can I just say, so when this stuff first started to come out and Trudeau was sort of alone on the world stage, we were making the allegations that the Indian government somehow was involved in the assassination of Nijar. I initially was one of those people who was kind of reflexively skeptical. I didn't understand from a communications perspective why the Liberal government was engaging in this the way that it was. And I think their excuse was, well, the Globe was about to come out on the story. We had to be ahead of it, blah, 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 blah. And I was like, why? Let the Globe come out with the story. You know, like, you're the government of Canada. You guys really shouldn't be making these kinds of accusations on a global stage unless you've got the goods and are like about to press charges like this. So it's the timing and the comm strategy of this struck me as really, really weird. So I was initially quite skeptical. My skepticism era is now very over. It's you don't have both Canada and the US filing charges of this nature unless you've got quite a lot of goods. We'll see what comes out in court, if anything at all. But it's pretty clear that this isn't a politically motivated desire to break ties with India in Canada. Like, that doesn't seem plausible to me. What is really weird to me is that conservatives who have been so correct and on point on Chinese interference don't seem to be able to grasp what's right in front of them on the Indian interference. I find that, well, it would be interesting to hear why, because I don't think it's as simple as they're all compromised by Modi's government. I don't think it's quite that simple. I think it's probably a little bit more bloodthirsty. I think it's a little bit more rooted in the idea that, we aren't taking terrorism on our soil seriously, and India is, and well, shruggy. I think it's more that than anything else, which is not correct, by the way. That's wrong. You shouldn't. We don't want diplomats of any country killing people and engaging in criminal activity here under the guise of diplomatic immunity.
Edgy, Jen. That's controversial.
I don't know. Like, that's maybe not. That's not great. It's not great, Bob. So no, I think the conservatives are being weird on this. I think that's worth noting, and I think that clearly now they're wrong. The idea that this could possibly be some kind of conspiracy concocted by the Liberal government is it's not how our systems work. That's not how the RCP works. It's not how our relationship with the US works. So no, I think there's more and more evidence that India is out to lunch here. India's gone inappropriate and should be
one of my
penalized
friends,
for it.
and I understand this is a somewhat risque joke, but one of my friends, I thought, sent me a private message where he says, I'm not going to tweet it, but I came up with a great joke. And I said, what? He says, the Indians have gone off the reservation. And I went, that's clever, but don't tweet that.
Don't tweet. In fact, we're going to be in trouble for even saying it in this podcast.
I advised the gentleman to not say that, and I mean that.
We advised you strongly not to take that joke, not to tell that joke. That's a bad joke. You're a bad
It's
person.
a clever joke, but it's a bad joke.
And we're only reporting on the joke to tell you not to tell it.
We were appalled. Two serious comments, though. One is that I'm worried about this one to the extent that, as you were saying a minute ago, about there being a lot of skepticism, particularly among conservatives in the right-wing media. The Line, thank God, took a pretty measured stand on this, where this was me editing some of the skepticism out of you, but we took the stand of, and honestly, I think it's still a defensible stand, that we find the charges against India plausible, but we're not wildly impressed by how the government's dealing with it. And I think that's still a defensible stand.
And I think it's even in this sense, I still think that from a communications and a diplomacy point of view, how this first was handled when it first came out by Canada was perhaps not the best.
I agree. And I think that stand is held up, even though we did at the time say we're pretty open-minded to these charges being accurate.
Yeah.
The other point I would make is
the other one I would just say is like it's very interesting to me that Canada and Canada and India are engaged in now this full-blown diplomatic dispute where we're expelling each other's diplomatic staff. But America's not getting their Indian diplomatic staff expelled, nor is there the same degree of rift between America and India, even though they're leveling the same charges, which to me suggests that once again, Canada's becoming the proxy target for the punching bag for people who have issues with America, because you can dispel the Canadian diplomats easily. You can afford that particular fight in the same way that the Chinese could afford the fight over Meng Wanzhou and from Huawei, but you can't afford to go after the Americans directly. So we're going to become like this proxy landing pad for every single diplomatic spat in the world with anyone who has outstanding issues with America, but doesn't necessarily want to take America on face to face because we're weak.
Will be used to prove points for domestic consumption, and people will not risk doing that to the U.S., which is the preeminent military and economic superpower.
That's right.
The other point I was going to make, and it's a quick one, Jenna, we can move on to Liberal caucus stuff, is I think the problem, and I have to be vague here, you'll understand why. I have had conversations with very senior Canadian officials who agree this is the problem. We have a problem in this country with foreign interference writ large. This is a problem. Conservatives and liberals have problems that are largely confined to slices of that broader problem. So both of the major parties have an incentive to be really, really strong on some of this stuff and surprisingly and suspiciously quiet about other parts of it. And I think I'm just, again, sketching very broad strokes here. I think one could reasonably infer by what we've seen from our parties here that the Liberal Party of Canada might be worried about having some skeletons in the closet regarding Chinese electoral interference, just as an example. And I think one could also reasonably infer that the Conservative Party of Canada might have some concerns about skeletons in their closet regarding Indian foreign interference, just hypothetically. And what I'm desperate for, my kingdom, for a party and a party leader who takes the entire issue seriously, not the slice of it that they think they can weaponize against their enemies without getting too much blowback against their own. But right now, I don't think we have that.
That's asking for a lot, Matt. That's asking for a lot. On that note, I think we should say like and subscribe and then come back to talking about the latest drama from the Liberals. The Garumba nexus continues. Like and subscribe. Check us out at www.readtheline.ca.
This episode of The Line has been brought to you by Unsmoke Canada, which is dedicated to helping Canadians who are looking to quit smoking understand the full range of options available. Despite decades of government programs and regulations, today nearly 5 million Canadian adults smoke cigarettes. Adult smokers who choose to continue to smoke should be aware that other options exist. Right now, accessing information about these options is heavily restricted in Canada. While not risk-free, alternatives such as heated tobacco and vaping products provide a potentially less harmful choice than cigarettes. Cigarettes burn tobacco, resulting in smoke that contains 6,000 harmful chemicals that are associated with smoking-related disease and death. Heating, tobacco, and vaping products have the potential to significantly reduce this risk. Health agencies around the world are now considering these alternatives to help end smoking. Updated laws can help adult smokers better understand the full range of options available, including the relative risk of these products. Millions of Canadians smoke cigarettes. Technology exists that can help change that, but policymakers need to take action. Learn about how a smoke-free future can be achieved at unsmoke.ca.
Well, we've been talking for a while. We didn't even get to the, other than briefly mentioning kind of the through line at the beginning, where I think a lot of the stories this week are explained by Liberal Party dysfunction. We didn't talk much about Liberal Party dysfunction. Can I just send a message directly to the Prime Minister?
Yes, I'm sure he tunes in to listen to us every day. Every week.
I know people around him do. So this message may, in theory, get to him. You're only hurting yourself. You're only hurting your party. This isn't going to work out the way you want. And this country needs an election. And I know people will say I'm just saying that because the Conservatives are set to win that election. I accept a Conservative victory in the next election as a given, but I think we're doing harm to ourselves as a nation by postponing it.
Matt, have you considered the counter argument to what you're just saying? The Conservatives,
that we deserve to be hurt?
That too, and us Canadians don't know what Justin Trudeau's actually done for us because we're misinformed. Also, I think you need to consider the possibility that the Conservatives are bad people. Mm-hmm. They're the bad people. And every single week that Justin Trudeau can heroically keep them out of office by any means necessary is a sign that he has been put here. That he's a good person who has been put here by God himself to keep this country safe for as long as possible.
Shout out to the military nerds out there, because I'm going to drop a term that isn't used in a lot of civilian contexts. But basically what you're describing is late stage Trudeau as a rearguard action.
Yeah, that's about right.
You can't stop what's coming, but you can delay it to buy time to do something else.
Every week that the Pierre Poilievre is not in power is a week that Pierre Poilievre cannot do harm.
I understand the argument, and I do think it does factor into what they're thinking, but I'm actually going to say that they're wrong. And I'm going to say that...
Because they don't do harm.
The kind of government...
Liberals.
The kind of government they're going to get and the kind of country that's going to be governed will be different depending on how long we spend getting to that outcome. I think we've probably already passed the point by which it's going to get nasty and dysfunctional. But imagine, like in your head, just as concepts, imagine the election we're going to have if we have it in 6 weeks. And then the first 3 months of Pierre Poilievre being prime minister, if we have the election in 6 weeks. And then how does your version of that exists in your mind differ if it's an election that takes place in a year and those first 3 months of Pierre Poilievre's premiership are starting in 12 months? Are there differences in how you imagine those things?
Matt, I'm just saying that if the Liberals can get their communications back in order and just hang on until after Donald Trump's elected, the Canadian people will see. They will see, firstly, all the work and all the effort that has gone in to this Liberal government and what it has tried to do. And also, I'm going to say this in my best kindergarten voice. And they're going to see the best work that the Liberals have tried to do for them and everything they've tried to do for them. And they're also going to see that, Donald Trump and his American-style politics, when they come up here, is not what they want. People are going to turn around on this stuff. I have faith.
Whose voice is that are you doing there?
Oh, I'm doing like a composite of every condescending Liberal who speaks to the Canadian public like they're children.
Do you want to see me say something that's going to get people in trouble?
Yeah.
I thought you were doing Chrystia Freeland.
Oh, well, I was trying to be nice about it.
But so, okay, you were doing Freeland, though. Mm-hmm. Okay, yeah. Okay,
right.
Then I won't get in trouble. You'll get in trouble.
Yeah.
So we started that out in kind of big picture existential terms. I I think, like, my takeaway, I mentioned this at the very beginning of the first segment. A lot of what's happening right now can be explained by what you said last week or what I said last week, the theory of the case versus the category error question, where the Liberals don't understand what's happening to them. And they're trying to respond in a way that is logical and rational within the framework of their misunderstanding and their miscalculation. And being combative in the way that they are and trying to hang on for every extra day and week makes sense when viewed through the lens of the theory of the case or what that is not our fault has happened to us. I think it's going to make things worse for the country. I think it's going to make things worse for them as a political party. And I'm pretty confident none of them are having fun these days.
Matt, that operates on the assumption that the Liberals are capable of harming the country. Do you believe that the Liberals are capable of harming the country?
I do.
Well, don't you know that they mean well?
I do. The more to the point, I know that they think they do. I want to like present Chris Selly with a plaque with that quote he had of Liberals are the kind of people who sincerely believe they would never do the kind of thing they're currently doing.
Anyway, I'm going to stop talking like a compass. And I didn't say that I was doing Chrystia Freeland. If that's your interpretation, then you're the bad person. Look.
Share the blame.
Share the blame. No, nah. Look, 4 Liberal cabinet ministers have announced that they're not seeking re-election, and that is happening amid ongoing drama since basically the weekend that there is some letter out there that has something between 12 and 40 Liberal caucus member names on it, insisting that Justin Trudeau resign. Once again, like, either these people just don't have the organizational ability to manage the coup they're trying to manage, or they don't have the people who have the balls to do it. Either way,
the agreed upon line term is Garumba.
Either way, we've been talking about this caucus revolt on and off since June now.
St. Paul's by-election was late June. There was a lot of anger over the summer, but the caucus was at home, dispersed because the Parliament was in session. We came back and there was LaSalle.
Yeah.
We've heard more of it. Yeah, I mean, it's really heated up in the last 2 weeks, but yeah, we've been talking about it since end of June.
It's not going to happen. Look, as I said, I don't totally rule out the possibility that the caucus goes full clown car to shit and Trudeau has to resign for some reason.
Yeah.
But bluntly, if any of you had the political balls, organizational skills, or political sense, you would have done this last spring, and you don't. Move on. You've made your choice. You can't change it now. It's over. I mean, and if you try to do it, you're going to make things more chaotic than they are now. You're locked in. Move on. I'm getting really tired of this particular plot line because every time it happens, a bunch of people get like all excited about it, and we start seeing editorials about how Trudeau should step down for the good of the country. He's not going to put the good of the country over his own ego. Come on now. We've seen this too many times. He's not going to do that. He can't. This is a man who literally believes that he was put on earth by God to fight Pierre Poilievre in the next election. He's not going to step down. He's not going to step down for the good of his party. He's not going to step down for the good of his country. He'll never accept that framing in his own head. He might be forced to step down because the caucus goes completely apeshit. That could happen. We might be heading into another accidental election or a chaos election because enough of the caucus just decides to say, I don't want to be here for this anymore. And they don't vote in the next confidence vote.
Yeah,
I'm putting my pin
to upset tummy that day.
Yeah, I'm putting my pin in the cork board on that particular possibility as a prediction. But like, he's not going to willingly step down because of some really compelling moral persuasion. It's just not. That's not reality anymore. It hasn't been for a long time. And also the people who are at the core of the Garumba caucus don't have it. They don't have it.
I agree, but I'm going to sketch out 2 possible chaos scenarios.
All right. Well, I do love chaos. I'm here for that.
You've talked about the accidental election. And I think most of the time when we've talked about the accidental election, I think mostly what we're talking about is miscalculation between the parties, where the NDP, the Bloc, the Conservatives, and the Liberals all get logjammed on some issue where none of them can work together, and we do have an election. It's possible. I think we also have to be cognizant of the possibility of an accidental internal Liberal civil war. And I don't rank that as high probability because Garumba. And I think what we're seeing is that rather than take up arms, I think what we're seeing is people saying, fuck it, I'm going to go pursue my next professional adventure. People who would be combatants in an internal Liberal civil war, I think are just leaving instead. So I think the possibility of that is low, but there might be something that might kick it into high gear again. Oh, well, there could be a couple of things. There's events, dear boy, events. But 4 ministers announced this week they're not running again. That's a cabinet shuffle. Right now, that's the prime minister's advantage. Because heading into that caucus meeting next week, he can kind of go, hey, I got 4 tickets to the really cool party. That gives him a carrot. He might be able to forestall a real coup against him, or a mutiny, or a pooch, or whatever you want to call it, because he's got 4 tickets to the VIP event. But after he's given them out, there's going to be a lot of people who might have been pretty confident they were going to get one of those tickets and didn't. And that could cause the next coup right after this one fails. So that's one possible chaos theory. And I think the other one that is, I'm just honestly fascinated by it. How low can he go in the polls? I'm not convinced they've hit bottom.
Can't rule it out. How many boomers are there left in this country?
What if, hypothetically, see, I'm politely ignoring that one. If Justin Trudeau, say, survives all of this intrigue, but by January, he's polling consistently at 18 or 19%, and the NDP is consistently at, say, 22%. How long could Trudeau survive that? My understanding of internal Liberal Party constitution rules are that 100% of the caucus could present him a letter saying you're done, and he could thank them for their vote and their donation, and then just keep being prime minister. I don't think they have a Reform Act mechanism to remove him.
They don't have. No, they don't. But I mean, realistically, in a Westminster parliamentary system, no, they can remove him. If he doesn't have the confidence of his caucus, he can't hold confidence in the House. You don't need a Reform Act mechanism to boot him out. You just need enough people with the Garumba to not vote for him the next election.
They don't have Garumba. If they did, they would have done it already.
Exactly. And that's it. And it doesn't even need to be 100% of them. I mean, I think I need to do the math. I think 35 of them would be enough to basically ensure that the party can't hold confidence. And I need to do the math on this again, depending on where that's
about right.
The NDP
30 or 35.
Depending on where the NDP or the Bloc caucus sit, right? And how many people show up that day.
Unite against the Liberals. If it's a conservative Bloc alignment, you might only need 5.
Yeah, exactly. It just depends on what the alignments and what the numbers and how they shake out in any particular thing, and that also depends on how many people show up and how many people just say fuck it o'clock. Nobody can tell you what the perfect number is, but if 35 people are now openly saying you need to step down or we're going to revolt, and they are willing to vote against their own government in a confidence motion, it's over. Trudeau can't survive that. And then once the confidence motion doesn't move forward, we move into an election. The Liberal Party constitution does force a leadership review after a failed election. So they absolutely can push him out. They don't need a Reform Act nonsense to do this. They just need balls. They don't have it.
That's the missing ingredient. They've got the numbers. They've got the cause.
They've been so whipped and they're so broken by partisan politics. Partisan politics does a bad thing to your brain, man. They can't do it. They can't act independently anymore. And when this government is over, by the way, they're going to wonder why they couldn't have done it. They're going to wonder what they were so afraid of. They're not going to understand why they were stuck in this state of paralysis after it's over. It's going to be really funny to watch. But no, I mean, anyway, moving on because I'm bored about talking about these people.
Do it or not. I'm not. Go home.
I'm not talking about your little Liberal caucus until I see public names on a letter. The rest of you are just...
Sean Casey. He has come out and said publicly he's an MP from PEI.
Until I see 30 or 40 public names on a letter, we're not talking about this anymore.
One name
I can't
makes
take
it worse,
seriously.
right? Because one name, and okay, congratulations on having trace elements of Garumba. Mr. Casey. But he stepped out. He said, I'm the guy. He put his name out there. If there had been 5, 10, 20, 30, 50 more after that, I want to move on from this too, but let me close with like a 30-second anecdote here.
Okay.
This week, I talked to conservatives who had been on either side of the O'Toole mutiny.
Mm-hmm.
I talked to people who were sticking the knife in his back. I talked to people who were on his staff at the time.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things they agree about, their shared version of events, was that it was a long time coming. But when it happened, it was fast.
Mm-hmm.
The Liberals have been talking about this since June. It ain't fast.
They can't take the shot. They can't take the kill shot, man. And also respect to Sean Casey for coming out and being independent. But if you don't have the organizational capacity to rally people to the cause, it ain't there either. So he's got balls. He just doesn't have the capability.
Garumba.
Like
and subscribe.
Garumba Nexus. Like and subscribe. Okay, guys, we're going on really long today and rambling, but we do have like 4 more things we really want to hit. 1, immigration. First, we're going to talk about MAID/euthanasia in Canada.
And then I'll do immigration after.
We're going to talk about immigration real quick. And then we are going to respond to someone who left us a really thoughtful comment in our YouTube comment section. And then we want to do one quick last shout out. So bear with us. We're going to bowl through this as fast as we can. One thing I did want to talk about, however, was the Associated Press, which again is a very respectable wire service in the United States. Or sorry, it's not in the United States. It's actually based in the United States, but it's everywhere. AP's everywhere. They did a really interesting breakdown and investigation into Canada's MAID. I hate calling it MAID. Euthanasia.
Medical aid in dying.
It's euthanasia. It's fine. Whatever you want to call it, but I call it euthanasia because that's what it is. They found some really, really fascinating things, including the fact that they looked at, for example, messages between doctors who were signing off on euthanasia, and they found that sometimes this was proving to be, and I'm semi-quoting here, a fraught process, that they was testing the limits of what condition qualified for access to euthanasia. They found disproportionately that there were a lot of people who were getting approved for euthanasia for problems that were more social than medical in nature. So people who were not diagnosed with terminal issue. Yeah, well, they weren't necessarily diagnosed with a terminal condition, but for example, say they were highly isolated, they had limited means, they had some kind of physical injury, but they were not able to live on what the disability checks that the government was giving them with that particular issue, so they got signed off for and made. Does nobody give a shit about them, really? Also, the rate at which we are signing off on euthanasia is high and growing. It's pretty astonishing. And also,
you did the research on this one, not me. But how many MAID deaths a year in Canada?
I think the last one I had was from 2021 was something like 10,000. Which isn't. It's look, we don't have 1% of a typical population will die every year. So that's what's 1% of 40 million was what?
1% of 40 million would be 400,000.
There we go. So 400,000 people die every year. Roughly 10,000 of them are by euthanasia. This is not...
I mathed, guys.
I mathed. Well done. You notice I looked at you expectantly when I asked that question.
And I had a brief look of panic in my eyes.
It's true. Yeah, we're great at math here on the line. Anyway, so this isn't... And what percentage of that 10,000 is being signed off on for sort of social isolation, poverty, those sorts of reasons, as opposed to stage 4 cancer? My guess is that it's a minority. My guess is that it's a
minority. I think I would bet most of the 10,000 deaths would probably have happened in that year anyway. I would be surprised if MAID was really moving our excess death numbers.
Yeah, I don't think it's moving our excess death numbers. I think it's all kind of comes out in the wash. Because I also remember a lot of the people who would get MAID would have died that year anyway.
Of serious medical conditions.
However, I don't think that of that 10,000, I highly suspect that what we would consider gray zone sign-offs are probably not the tiny minority. I think that they are probably a lot higher than we would be comfortable with. So here, I mean, you have a fairly extremist position on euthanasia. Would you like to explain it? And then can I explain why I think you were perhaps wrong a little bit, tiny bit wrong?
I like euthanasia.
Okay.
I don't know if I would choose it, because that's going to depend on my personal life circumstances if I ever find myself with a terminal illness. But I like living in a country that has a legalized euthanasia regime. This is something I've championed for years before, and I'm glad we have MAID. I'm not wild about every facet of MAID, but on a binary choice between living in a country with or without euthanasia, I like living in a country with euthanasia.
Okay, so here's my concerns, is that if you have euthanasia as one choice among a plethora of choices where, say, look, we have a healthy and functional social safety net so that people who are isolated or homeless have access to supports. We have a healthy palliative care option so that people who don't want euthanasia for, say, religious or moral options aren't going to necessarily have miserable deaths. They will be comfortable and cared for into their final natural passing. And in that kind of circumstance, if someone chooses euthanasia, it's a choice. It is a choice. But if you don't have the other two parts of that stool, a healthy social safety network and access to good quality palliative care, then euthanasia is not a choice anymore. What you're being given is abject misery, or we kill you, or we can get, it's mercy killing.
Yeah, you get the needle.
Yeah, you get the needle. Like we'll give you the same treatment that we give our pets. You know, like that's basically what we're heading into here. And this is the concern that a lot of the people who initially, when I heard people raise concerns about the possibility of MAID in Canada, and I heard the slippery slope arguments, I didn't find those arguments compelling. I was like, no, we're obviously not going to be offing people who have suicidal ideation. We're obviously not going to be offing people just because they're homeless or have they're disabled or they're miserable. Like, you know, that's obviously, we are not going to be using euthanasia to supplement for a failing social safety net. Those are crazy allegations.
Oops,
that's exactly what we're doing now. It's increasingly the path we're on. That's the runway we are on. So, you know, I don't think you can separate euthanasia as a choice from the social safety networks in which it is administered. And if the social safety networks in which it is being administered are failing, and we're seeing anecdotal stories, and I realize these are anecdotal stories, and the pearl of anecdote isn't data, but we are seeing anecdotal stories of, for example, veterans with serious mental health issues being suggested, maybe you should just kill yourself.
Can I have a therapist? No, but we can kill you.
No, but we can kill you. Great.
Yeah. Can I have an affordable housing unit in downtown Toronto? No, but have you considered death?
I mean, this quote was particularly amazing to me. It was, I'm quoting from ABC News here. Quote, one provider said any suggestion that they should provide patients with better housing options before offering euthanasia, quote, seems simply unrealistic and hence cruel amid a national housing crisis. I mean, wow, total disregard for human life. Fuck you. But also not wrong, because we can't build houses. So, I mean, honestly, I'm so sorry, person sleeping on a subway grate. Have you considered euthanasia as not only a solution to your problems, but also ours? Yeah. I mean, it's just so easy for us to get into deeply dystopian evil territory here without any kind of appropriate moral guardrails or any kind of conversation about the value of human life for its own sake. Or like, how should I say this? There's just no philosophical argument that talks about why a state should or shouldn't be enabling the ease of suicide. Right? Like there's a lot of our conversations around euthanasia was grounded in this almost libertarian, well, if I want to off myself, I should be able to do so in a merciful way. And almost none of it was counteracted with a humanist argument, or dare I say even a religious argument about what is the purpose of the state and what is the role of the state in valuing human life. And without that kind of weighing of considerations, you do fall into the trap of saying, well, this homeless person has no help or no chance. And you're right. He can't live off this government check reasonably. I guess that's reasonable to kill him then. Because he's not really, he doesn't have inherent value as a human, really, if you think about it. And if he wants to kill himself, what's it to us? We're not lessened as a community if he decides to let off himself, right? Like that's where the logic takes you. And that logic gets you into real dystopian, real evil shit real fast. And that's the track we're on right now because we're uncomfortable with the conversations around the value and, for lack of a better term, sanctity of human life.
I might be the problem here, but I don't get wrapped up in sanctity of human life concerns that much. I still very much have the libertarian perspective of only I determine the value of my life. Now, I don't think that we can take the argument too far. I don't think some doctor ought to be obligated to kill me. And, I know we've already had issues about what healthcare facilities can or cannot opt out of this stuff. I don't think I need to drag anyone else into my problems. I get that, but I don't know.
But you're saying it's like MAID can only be ethical if there's actually a choice.
No, I know. I agree with that.
And if everything
my
around...
My platonic ideal of euthanasia is that if I'm facing a shit diagnosis, my choices are I'm going to pursue every treatment option in a functional, effective healthcare system because I want to beat it or I want to maximize my life. That's door number one. Door number two is that I want to live as long as possible comfortably. So I want a functional palliative care system there that will make my death manageable. Door number three is give me the needle.
Okay, so
I want to live in a country where I have all three of those things. I agree with you that right now, increasingly, we live in a country where we only have the needle. And that's a problem.
Well, yeah. And also the other thing I would just point out is, like I said, the libertarian argument for MAID only works in a position of perfect choice. If your social safety nets are starting to corrode or collapse, that isn't choice anymore. You're not consenting to euthanasia if you don't really have any other options. You're being pushed into it.
I am curious. I agree. I agree with that. You're being very reasonable
so like I said, I don't want to pull back euthanasia to the point where someone with a stage 4 terminal cancer, bone cancer can't get it. Like I would like to maintain a system where that person has access to a humane and compassionate end of life care. I'm all for that. But yeah, do I think somebody should be getting signed off on euthanasia for a non-terminal back pain because they're broke? Sorry, no. I don't think. I think that I think there's a compelling argument that the state shouldn't be enabling that.
I could live with that regime. I would not have objections to it. What I am curious about, and I say this neutrally, I am curious. We've already seen backlashes on things like mandatory treatment for drug addiction, homeless encampments, housing, immigration. We're talking about immigration in a minute. We're already seeing cultural and political backlash on this. I think we will see some on MAID. I am curious to what Prime Minister Poilievre and his cabinet will decide the appropriate reset position is for MAID. Do they bring it back to something close to what it started with? Do they try to get around Supreme Court rulings with the notwithstanding clause and get rid of it altogether? I don't know. I would welcome clarity on that, but I am interested to see where they go with this. I honestly don't know.
I think we would all welcome more clarity about what exactly the Conservatives plan to do in government, but I'm not holding my breath expecting it. On that note, I don't really want to talk about that anymore because I want to talk about immigration real fast.
So this was hot off the presses. I'm going to have to click out here. Sorry, give me a second. I'm just clicking into the different tab here. This hot off the presses, Abacus released this morning. I don't want to throw a lot of numbers at you here, but the takeaway is that half of Canadians, more than half of Canadians, now have an overall negative view of immigration.
Called it. Told you that was going to happen.
One of the interesting things that is happening, I think, and I'm not sure which is cause and which is effect, but Conservatives and Bloc voters are the most concerned with immigration. And as Conservative strength is growing, I think that's pulling the numbers. I'm just not sure which one's pulling the numbers. I don't know if the Conservatives are riding an anti-immigration wave or if the Conservatives are moving the needle on immigration. I don't know. We'll find out, I guess, eventually. I have a terrible feeling that we took something that was a multi-generational success story in this country and made it. I think we broke the immigration consensus. And I know it's a blunt statement on my part, but I'm not convinced it's a controversial one anymore.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, I think it's right. Yeah, we actually had a really successful immigration system until bluntly Trudeau started to radically pump it up in order to mitigate for other problems that we were having in our economics. And now people are looking around and saying, I can't afford to live in my house anymore. My kids can't live near me. All of the pressures on the social safety net that we were describing earlier are exacerbating, and just importing more people doesn't seem to be easing any of the log jams or making things better. If bringing in more and more people was supposed to get more houses built and get more nurses in and get more doctors in, where are they? All we're seeing is more pressure on the systems and no alleviation.
I agree.
That being said, I would say that my restaurant options in suburban Calgary have become radically better so fast. I got a new dosa place in next door. I got a Szechuan place coming in. I am really pleased. But
new Indian place just opened in my neighborhood, so excited to try that out.
Yep. Pro restaurant, loving
pro
that.
Restaurants.
We love that.
I agree with you in your criticism of the Trudeau Liberals here. They broke it. They own it.
Yep. But the numbers here are very clear about what happened after 2015. The immigration numbers went dramatically up year over year after they came to power. I am going
to say one thing, and I don't know if it's in their defense per se. They were responding to demand in Canada because there were educational institutions, business associations that were saying, give us more, give us more, give us more. It wasn't like Justin Trudeau had the brainwave one day. Wouldn't it be amazing if? I think there was broader civil society demand for more bodies. What I think the Liberals fucked up is that they were lazy in how they answered that demand, and they took their eye off the ball. Again, I don't think this is particularly controversial anymore. What actually killed us was not the permanent track immigrants. It was the temporary immigration streams, which is
which
visitors
we should never have had. And also, bluntly, that we should never have had the foreign workers program. If you're good enough to come here and work for Canada, you should be a citizen. You're good enough to be a citizen.
Or at least be on a track to citizenship.
Or at least on a track to citizenship. That's...
Yep. So again...
As someone who lived in the Middle East and saw the abuse of temporary workers' permits, there is no way to create a system like that isn't rife with exploitation and abuse. It's just a vicious, vicious system.
As with MAID, I'm honestly curious what the resting place is going to be, because I think one of the problems that I worry about this a lot. So I'm a guy who has people in my inner circle who are either first or second generation immigrants. And these people have made my life better, not just my dining options, but including those. The politicians right now are moving to meet the public where the public is. And I think we're only starting that process. Where is the public going to be on immigration in 2 years?
Yeah.
Where will the politicians have to keep moving to keep them? And I'm not saying need to as if I'm endorsing it, but I'm saying I'm a realist. I understand the way electoral incentives work. These guys will chase whatever they think the popular position is. Right now, 53% of Canadians have a negative view of immigration. We've baked in continuing problems. The healthcare system is going to continue to deteriorate. Our social services are going to continue to deteriorate. Our housing situation is going to continue to deteriorate. We don't have the ability to turn the ship around on a dime. Best case scenario, things still get worse in the medium term. Where will that 53% go? How high will it go? And what will we see our politicians do in order to try and chase that?
Well, look, economics is the most powerful god, right? I actually think that a lot of the turnaround on immigration, to some extent, will resolve itself when a lot of people come here from other countries, realize that actually the quality of life we're offering them is pretty shit, frankly.
And
they go home, or they move, or
go to the States.
They go to the States. And the way that Canada is setting itself up right now is that we're a landing pad for the most talented people who want to get into the US.
Yeah, we're a waiting room.
Yeah, we're a waiting room, right? Which is not a great deal for Canada, but is fantastic for the United States. But anyway, that's kind of what we're establishing right now. Anyway, on that note, two last things that I wanted to round up the podcast with. Last week we had a really great comment by a YouTuber, YouTube commentator, a person underneath our commenter.
Someone who commented in our YouTube comment section.
The person watched the video and then wrote us a very thoughtful message. And I wanted to read it out because I thought it was a really, really good point. This is from Fubushore. Since you are a journalist, maybe you can answer this question. Why have I not seen a single media outlet in this country mention that the day after Bloc Québécois leader Yves François Blanchet said, quote, the ultimatum, a no confidence vote against the government stands after the federal Liberals voted against the senior benefits, blah, 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 blah. Blanchet's, I believe, ex-wife, Nancy Diesel, was appointed by the Liberals to chair the Canadian Foundation for Innovation, which is responsible for distributing billions of dollars in grants and funding. Why does this fantastic coincidence not merit reporting by a single news outlet in this country? Seriously, WTF? And Fubushore, I think that story is worth digging into. I think it absolutely is. I'm not sure that it wasn't covered by anybody.
Well, here's the thing. I definitely heard about it.
So I definitely heard about that.
But I don't know if it was like a random Substack or if it was CBC.
Yeah, so we want to check into it. The answer, I think, why is because literally so much is going on in federal politics that we all just kind of dropped the thread, including Matt and I, because bluntly, we did hear about it and we just completely forgot to mention it in last week's podcast too. There have also been a couple. It wasn't
like we weren't short topics.
Yeah, we weren't short topics. I mean, the other thing that also came out is that there have been some very interesting Auditor General's reports coming out. There was a COVID report that came out that Paul Wells covered on his Substack. So there's like a couple of threads that we kind of lost track of. And I think this is potentially one of them. The other answer is bluntly, Matt and I aren't experts in Quebec politics. Quebec is kind of a world unto itself. I think this is worth digging into. I think it's worth reporting a little bit more out, but I want someone who's got more of an expertise in Quebec to do so.
We'll have to go find a person.
I think we got to go find
somebody. That's on our to-do list anyway.
It's on our to-do list. So I think that we should, thank you very much for that comment. I think you're right. I
think so too. And I echo what Jen said. The one thing I am going to say is I'm not accusing our commenter of this, but I'm just asking for a degree of understanding that 99% of the time when someone demands to know why the media isn't covering something, they only know about it because the media did cover it. Exactly. What they're usually saying is that I think it should be getting more attention.
Yes, exactly.
Which is different.
That's different. The other thing I would say is, again, my very primitive knowledge of this particular story, the individual who was assigned here was his ex-wife, not his current wife. And as a result, probably wouldn't fall under the various auspices of Conflict of Interest Acts. This is something that we've had to discover at the line through our reporting many times. Conflict of Interest Acts often don't cover exes. They don't cover ex-spouses. So you can hand, say, a multi-billion-dollar tobacco contract to the law firm of your ex-spouse and get away with it because that's not considered really not kosher.
We will look into it. One last quick one for me, and I know it's been a long podcast, but I want to just end on this. A couple days ago, I received an email out of the blue from Sarah Fulford, colleague in the journalism industry, obviously, but it was a personal note. She was letting me know that her father, Robert Fulford, had passed away. And Bob Fulford was in his early 90s and had not been writing much in recent years as the years had accumulated. And Bob eventually had largely retired from public life and writing. Look, I'm not going to eulogize him here. We've indulged the patient. We've tested the patience of the viewers and the listeners long enough. We've been going on for a while, but I want to just make a purely personal observation. When I was National Post editor, comment section editor, I had a really interesting experience, which is to be a young guy, relatively speaking, having the opportunity to be an editor for people who represented a world of journalism that is gone. I got to be friend and editor to Robert Fulford, Rex Murphy, George Jonas. I was never Christy Blatcher's editor, but I worked with her. We're losing an entire generation's worth of talent. And you and I have talked about this before. We got a little maudlin about it, talking about whether or not the industry itself will survive. Will anyone, and God willing, in decades from now, many, many, many decades from now, when you and I pass on, will anyone notice? Like, I don't know if journalism and journalists will maintain the public interest to an extent that it has now. I don't know, but I will simply say that being an editor to Robert Fulford was simultaneously a tremendous honor and also an intense source of imposter syndrome, because Bob Fulford was an icon, a titan of Canadian journalism when I became his editor, and I was pretty young and I was pretty green. So he was such an incredible gentleman to work with, an absolute pleasure. He was one of the easiest people to work with. I'm very sorry to hear he's gone. I'm not convinced we will have another one like him. I'm not convinced there'll be another generation like him. And to his wife, to his family, and everyone he leaves behind, I am sorry. And I think often, Bob just passed away this week, but I've thought often in recent years of my friend George Jonas. I would have loved to have been able to meet him for a lunch and talk about all of this. And there's institutional memory and perspective that we're losing. So my condolences to the Fulfords. It was sad news to get. So a sad note to end on, but Bob Fulford, rest in peace.
Very well. And on that note, one final like and subscribe to The Line. Do check us out, www.readtheline.ca. And on that note, I'm going to put a pin in it and end it here.
Like and subscribe.
Today's podcast was brought to you by Unsmoke Canada. Now is the time to modernize Canadian laws so that adult smokers have information and access to better alternatives. By doing so, we can create lasting change. Learn more at unsmoke.ca.